Why is Metroid so much less popular in Japan compared to the West? How big a difference is this? How long has this been evident? And is this a permanent situation or one that Nintendo might be able to fix? Moreover, what have Nintendo tried to do in the past to correct this situation? And what could and will they do going forward? This is a Nintendo Forecast deep dive into how Metroid is perceived in Japan as opposed to the West. Firstly, let's be clear that this is not a new phenomenon. As far back as 1994, longtime series producer Yoshio Sakamoto referred to how they were including the overseas market even then in their considerations when he noted Super Metroid was intended for both overseas and domestic audiences, so required content that was completely the same. He used the fact that the game did not have any significant written narrative to tell a story that was purely through the graphics and the imagery on screen. In 2003, Sakamoto also noted that the series is highly respected and is also extremely popular overseas. In the 2002 annual report from Nintendo themselves, they discuss Metroid Prime as being highly regarded in Europe and America, while in March 2007, Satoru Iwata, the then president of Nintendo, referred to Metroid Prime 3 as being, and I quote, primarily for the overseas market. Sales data bears this out. We don't have granular numbers for all the Metroid games, but the consensus seems to be that the American numbers are many times higher than the Japanese sales, and VGC confirmed via Japanese games magazine Famitsu that at 86,798 copies sold, Metroid Dread's first 3 days on sale in Japan put it above the lifetime sales of Fusion, Hunters, and the original Metroid in the same territory. Leading figures from Nintendo have never really addressed this issue fully head on, but they have talked around it, and so we can get a sense of their thought process. In June 2011, Iwata gave us our first insight, although he wasn't specifically referring to Metroid Prime or the Metroid franchise, when he said, currently, in the Western countries especially, war-themed gun-shooting games, which are not well received in Japan, are very popular. It is a reality that some of these games sell 10 million units per year in those markets, and this is one valid type of video game genre. I would personally feel sad if all video games became something like that, but on the other hand, I do not think such games should disappear. Iwata's right. Games like Doom largely sink without a trace in Japan, except for a niche community, but despite some surface similarities, Doom is very different from Metroid Prime, and more different still from the mainline Metroid series. On the other hand, it seems that other Metroidvania titles like Ori and Hollow Knight did fairly well in Japan, though I can find no reliable sales data to confirm and can only use anecdotal evidence. If the success of these franchises was to lead to any kind of breakthrough, though, we probably already saw it with the Japanese response to Metroid Dread. But while Famitsu recorded 128,257 sales for the game after a month on the market, this is a tiny fraction of the reported 854,000 copies The Verge claims were shifted in the US in a similar time frame, and of course that doesn't take into account European or other non-American sales. When you consider that Switch console sales in Japan are generally not that far off North America's, a half to two-thirds at different times, these numbers feel even more dramatically out of whack. Now sure, Metroid Prime Remastered's first-person perspective gameplay might have done even worse in Japan, with Metroid Prime Remastered doing numbers significantly below Dread's worldwide take. Less than 5% of the sales for the fiscal year it launched in were Japanese sales, compared to 62% for Switch Sports, 33% for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and 15% for Zelda that year, as percentages of Japanese sales out of the worldwide total. Now, there were other games that came close, such as Mario Strikers Battle League, with 7% of the total coming from Japan and 93% coming from the other territories, but it's still clear why Nintendo frame Metroid to their investors as a series for the Western audience primarily. It's also striking that while Nintendo has been broadly supportive of Metroid over the years, they have always been close to saying farewell to it. After the release of Super Metroid in 1994, which preceded an 8-year hiatus for the series, Sakamoto said, "I think the series is basically finished. Metroids were basically designed to be exterminated in the first place, so I wanted to finish it in the most beautiful form." Sakamoto did, however, say that he would like to see Samus return in an action game, and of course, we know that there was an aspiration to put the series on the ill-fated 64DD accessory for the N64, although of course the game that ultimately eventuated from this, Metroid Prime, was completely different from the core series, and so in a sense it was a new series that was started up even with the same IP. It's also notable that since the 2000s, the series has been given to a succession of Western studios, including most obviously Retro, but also Metroid Prime Hunters was developed by Nintendo Software Technology in Redmond, Washington. Metroid Prime Federation Force was made by Next Level Games in Vancouver. Metroid Prime Pinball was made by the British team Fuse Games, and we know that there was an unconfirmed first development team for Metroid Prime 4, though this is widely assumed to be a Bandai Namco splinter group in Singapore. That covers the entire Prime series, but even the original Metroid is now being developed internationally, with the last two games under the supervision of Mercury Steam out of Madrid. If they truly see this as a series that they are developing essentially for Western tastes, it makes sense that it would also be developed with Western developers in the driver's seats. While Miyamoto especially has always been very clear that the core of the development planning was at EAD, what is now EPD, the Japanese Nintendo team, it is also clear that Retro Studios at least were extremely vocal in advocating for their perspectives all the way through development. And it does seem that Nintendo has at times brought about how to break into a Japanese market. In 2010, Sakamoto noted of the reluctance of Japanese gamers to dive into Metroid titles. He said, "We are conscious of that, and Japanese market acceptance is on our mind. There's an expression in Japanese where someone dislikes a food without ever having eaten it. You have to offer those people a certain incentive to taste the food to prevent them from saying that they don't like it. So we're trying a new approach here, and we're trying to pull a new audience in to see if they like it. Having said that, we're still going for a global acceptance with Metroid Other M, but we're trying a game style that has worldwide market appeal that even Japanese people will like. If Other M was an attempt to bridge the gap between Samus and Japan, it evidently was not successful, with a lousy critical reception in the West to accompany even worse sales than usual, and it didn't appear to light the Japanese gaming scene on fire either. This is also our second clue, after Iwata's observation about guns, as to why Metroid might not appeal in Japan. Simply stubbornness. Sakamoto expanded on these specifics for this negative impression that Japanese people appear to have of the series. In Japan, the people who are into Metroid tend to be hardcore game fans. It's not a series that's necessarily found acceptance in Japan outside of that niche. You could also say that it's the same as how science fiction is embraced in the United States compared to Japan. Science fiction seems to be a niche genre in Japan as a whole, where it seems to have found more mainstream success in the US." End quote. Of course, Japan is famous for certain science fiction series and concepts, but these frequently are to do with how humanity adapts in a post-apocalyptic environment, including how it manages and copes with powers of technology that can push humankind towards godhood. On the other hand, a lot of Western sci-fi takes the lead from the Western genre, being about exploring frontiers, facing the fear of the unknown, and so on. It's notable that the Super Metroid developers talk about being film fans, and the kinds of films they reference include titles like Die Hard, Dances with Wolves, Indiana Jones, basically an enormous amount of Western media. In particular, Yoshio Sakamoto has talked of his fondness for Italian horror giant Dario Argento and his suspense masterwork, Suspiria. It's not actually the only time that Nintendo has been influenced by other media. Notably, Zelda Link's Awakening owed a huge amount to the mania for the 90s television hit Twin Peaks in Japan, and German time travel film Run Lola Run inspired elements of Zelda Majora's Mask. And most obviously of all, the twist ending of the original game owed a lot to the recent emergence of Ripley as a sci-fi heroine in the 1979 Ridley Scott classic Alien. Given that the team seem all along to have been trying to channel a specifically Western style with this game, perhaps it's not a surprise that it left Japanese players feeling cold. Many Japanese games place a premium on social elements, not necessarily between players, but certainly between characters, with RPGs often involving complex casts of characters, and even titles like Mario featuring a collection of colourful side characters and even enemies with distinctive faces and expressions. Sure, Zelda was warned that it's dangerous to go alone, but then again, Zelda is another franchise that for much of its history has been more strongly received in the West compared to Japan, though it never did the kind of low sales that Metroid has shown. It's striking that in 2003, when Metroid was to be adapted for a manga series, Izuki Koigi, who adapted it, instantly had to struggle to include a cute child alongside Nintendo's tough bounty hunter hero. He told Shinesparkers, "At first, Nintendo strongly disapproved of an original story featuring a child in a harsh Metroid universe. They probably thought that harsh universe would collapse. However, since I myself thought to show children an adult with a strong sense of justice and resolution through Samus Aran's bravery, I absolutely did not want to take out those things I wanted to show kids out of my story. Because of that, we went to the Nintendo's Kyoto headquarters and we directly negotiated with the staff and the producer, Sakamoto. After that, this story in the Metroid universe featuring a child could finally be made as a side story, Metroid Samus and Joey." End quote. The improbable Samus and Joey team-up showed the way that a more Japanese-skewed take on the character and the universe might go, and kind of tracks with the way Other M tried to open up to a Japanese audience by focusing on Samus as a person, with a slip-on cover in Japan making manifest the concept of looking behind Samus's mask to see the person beneath to the Japanese consumer. It's obvious when you consider especially Metroid Prime that there are really no faces for large chunks of the game. Samus herself is masked and it's a first-person game anyway, while the monsters for the most part don't have recognizable features that could be described as a face. Ridley evidently has achieved outsized popularity, not least through Smash, where Sakurai noted the character couldn't appear in the Wii U version due to his huge size, something it apparently took until the Switch to find a solution for. Still, the game fits the model of a lone hero exploring a dangerous frontier far better than Japanese prototypes. On the other hand, if they thought that a more populous version of the game in the form of Metroid Prime Federation Force was going to do any better in terms of numbers in Japan, they were sorely mistaken, as that game in the first week didn't even crack the top 20 video games sold in Japan, and number 20 only shifted 4,441 copies, meaning that the Japanese sales must have been truly derisory. So, it seems like there are a few things at play here. The game was always influenced heavily by Western media and therefore appealed to Western tastes significantly. Nintendo weren't rushing to revive it, but when they did, they increasingly treated it as something for the Western audience and involved Western developers all the more, which might have created a kind of cycle of pushing it more and more towards the West. Samus and Joey showed a take that could have tried to pitch more to Japan, but Sakamoto would never have considered something so tonally discordant for the main series, and when he tried his own pitch to the heartland of Japan in the form of Metroid Other M, and Tanabe possibly had similar aspirations with Federation Force, both approaches failed. Metroid Dread, Metroid Prime Remastered, and Metroid Prime 4 all appear to be a return to first principles, with the masters of the series doing, it would seem, exactly what they envisaged, without hindrance and with acclaimed Western studios handling production, as with the best received titles of the Metroid Prime series at least. Is there now a way for Nintendo to bring Metroid to the Japanese audience? It's certainly possible, especially with both Tanabe and Sakamoto in their 60s and new blood likely to hop on board the Metroid gunship. But Nintendo also understand the series' Western appeal and are unlikely to wish to tarnish that with divisive changes, especially after their experience during the 2010s. It may be that through advertising they can draw people more into Metroid. They've managed to really big up Pikmin in Japan this generation, but very likely Nintendo see Metroid as one of those franchises where the primary audience will remain abroad, and since most of their revenue comes from international sales, that's not the worst thing in the world, especially if it balances out their occasional more niche Japanese titles. It's not the only title Nintendo have in their lineup to be Western focused from the point of view of its audience. Donkey Kong Country and Advance Wars were both particularly popular outside of Japan. Now, Donkey Kong has returned to Japan with a 3D take in the form of 2025's Donkey Kong Bonanza, including a redesign of the character to take him back to his roots. But a redesign with Samus is tricky because the essence of her character is the mystery about her expression, and also she was not designed by Miyamoto, and so Miyamoto has no particular need to impose his own approach onto the character now. I do think Metroid Dread did a particularly effective job in characterizing Samus through body language, though, although this is hard to see from the outside until you actually play the game. The thing is, tastes do change over time. Perhaps there'll be a breakout Japanese sci-fi show, and this will inspire fresh interest in the character. Nintendo still has Metroid listed as one of its 9 major franchises when it does press announcements, suggesting that they still view it fondly as having great importance to them. Note that while the list does include Mario, Donkey Kong, Zelda, Pokemon, Pikmin, Splatoon, Kirby and Animal Crossing, it doesn't include Fire Emblem, despite that series' huge popularity in Japan especially compared to Metroid. I do think there will be some kind of reckoning for the future of the Metroid IP as we go on though, and perhaps another attempt to find a way to make the franchise appeal to a Japanese audience in a manner that doesn't compromise the experience for Western players. But sadly, not every type of game appeals to every person, and in Japan, it appears that Metroid, for the time being at least, is simply too alien an alien landscape. For more from this channel, do check out these videos on screen or the Patreon. Thanks so much for everyone for watching, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.